Right, hello guys, and welcome back. At the beginning of the Edge of Fate, Solar Titans essentially became back because Bungie buffed hammers so that they would be picked up instantly rather than on a cooldown when you left them on the ground. This didn't work for like the first 3 weeks of the DLC, but afterwards they did fix it and now they work really well, and Solar Titans have been a solid build choice ever since then. And today, I wanted to bring you a iteration of the Solar Titan build that I believe is just the perfect, doesn't get better than this. This is the one that you want to be using if you are going to be playing Solar Titan. And I have my reasons because today I'm going to be showcasing you how to get insane levels of damage resistance on your Solar Titan that you could never ever get before, not in the Edge of Fate at least, but now is possible in Renegades thanks to some of the new armor sets and of course the Praxic Blade. But I promise you guys, this is by far the best Solar Titan build there is on YouTube, and I know that sounds like a little outlandish, but I promise you it is true. So why is my build the best? Why is it different? Well, we are using two very specific set bonuses with the Solar Titan. I'll get into the exotics like Worm Gods and the subclass afterwards, but you must understand what makes this build so special and so good now is because of the Smoke Jumper set bonus and the Ferropotent set bonus. And before we get into anything else, I really want to make these effects of these set bonuses clear so that you guys understand how they work. So first of all, Ferropotent. This is a new armor set that has come to us in Renegades, and it comes from solo and fire team ops. It's very common. You probably have a bunch lying around by now. And essentially what it does is it lets you gain damage resistance when your shields regenerate. So if you look here and I damage myself, when my shields start to kick in, you will see in just a moment, there we have it, resist in the bottom left corner. And one stack of resist is a 10% DR. And that lasts for 7 seconds. And that is any time that your shields regenerate. But the coolest part about this set bonus is that it works with every single or almost every single source of healing. So if I damage myself again and I cure myself with my grenade, there you can see it, resist in the bottom left corner. And this works with restoration, this works with cure. Basically everything that you have going 24/7 with a Solar Titan, because you're just going to be bonking everything, proccing cure with the hammer, proccing restoration with the sunspots that you create. So you're gonna have Ferropotent active all the time. So free 10% DR just for doing what you would normally do on the build. No extra special steps or anything like that. The second set is Smoke Jumper. Now I know that this is sort of currently unobtainable / really hard to obtain. Yes, you can get Smoke Jumper pieces from Hawthorne right now. You can get them from Hawthorne engrams, but there is no direct way of farming them like there was in Ash and Iron. But anyway, this piece, when you pick up an Orb of Power, gain a brief period of rapidly decaying damage reduction. So what that's going to look like is I'm going to collect an orb here, and it's going to give me Ride Together, Die Together for 3 seconds on the left of my screen. So basically, for each of those 3 seconds that I have the buff, I'm going to get a different level of damage resist for each of them. So at the first second, it's 45%. At the second, it is 30%, and at the final third second, it is 15%. So if you average that out, that is an average of 30% DR over those 3 seconds. So essentially, if we build our build correctly, we are going to be able to get orbs very quickly with triple heavy-handed on our gloves. Then we're going to be able to pair that with Ferropotent. So we essentially, with every kill, we get Ferropotent triggered, and with every orb that we create from that kill, we are going to get Smoke Jumper triggered. So those two together are going to result in, I believe, a 37% DR. I'll have the calculation up on screen, but that is way more DR than you normally would have on a Solar Titan. And this is what I love about the armor set system, because we're finally getting to a point now where they are actually starting to matter quite a lot when it comes to building your characters. Your subclass and fragments aren't enough anymore. It is finally time to start investing in armor, which I think is awesome. So that is the main reason why we are getting so strong with Solar Titan now. So now let's just get into the rest of it. And of course, we are going to be using Worm God Caress with Solar Bonk hammers. And just as a refresher, this is essentially what you're going to want to be using here for the subclass. The super doesn't matter at all because we're never going to be using it, because our throwing hammer is just by far the best piece of our kit, so we build into this massively. Then I've also gone for the healing grenade because we don't need an offensive grenade, plus this is kind of clutch, can help you in certain situations. Aspects wise, of course, we want Roaring Flames, because when we are at 3 stacks of Roaring Flames, our throwing hammer damage is going to be increased by 200% or 3 times, so that is very much mandatory. Then we have Sol Invictus, where Solar ability Final Blows or Hammer of Soul impacts and defeating scorched targets creates a sunspot. So every kill that we get with the throwing hammer is going to create a sunspot, which is going to give us restoration. It's also going to cure us when we pick up the hammer. So again, this is just another way of sustaining ourselves and proccing Ferropotent at the same time. Then for the fragments, we just have Ember of Torches to make us radiant every time we hit an enemy with our hammer. Then I have gone for Ember of Searing here. I'm quite a big fan of Searing on this build, because if you end up losing your hammer, if I channel my inner Soul to Greppa here, like, my hammer This fragment is really good for just getting your melee energy back, because every time that you get a punch kill, which by the way, when you have Roaring Flames, your regular punches apply Scorch. So if you defeat Scorch targets with your punches, you will get Fire Sprites back, which recharge your Ammer. So you're gonna want to need that just to, you know, get things rolling again. Then we have Ember of Solace. Radiant and Restoration effects applied to you have increased duration, makes the Restoration longer, makes the Radiant longer from torches. And then finally, the last fragment is basically up to you. You could go with Ember of Empyrean if you wanted to, but it's not really needed, especially if you're in an activity that has lots of ads and you're getting lots of kills. You don't need the extension from Empyrean. To be honest, I would rather just take plus 10 melee stat to improve my melee stat, which is 200, and we're going to get to that in just a second. So that's why I'm taking Ember of Eruption, because it just gives me free 10 melee points. However, if you don't really care about that, you could go for Empyrean, but I prefer my stats being nice over needing Empyrean, because you don't. So, speaking of stats, 200 melee, that is literally the only stat that matters. Grenade doesn't matter. Super doesn't matter. You're never using it. Class doesn't matter. You're never using it. Weapons doesn't matter. You're never using it. The only stat that actually might matter a little bit more than melee is health. But essentially what this means is that you only need to care about melee, and going all the way to 200 to get that 30% damage increase in PvE, which is multiplicative, by the way. So essentially what that means, armor-wise, every single one of my pieces, with the exception of my Worm Gods, are brawlers with, you know, various tertiary stats. Just quickly, my helmet is Brawler with a tertiary stat in Grenade. My Worm Gods is Paragon, but it could be Brawler, it doesn't matter. Chest piece, Brawler, tertiary stat in Class. Boots, Brawler, tertiary stat in Super. And then class item, Brawler, tertiary stat in Super. But please, honestly, just understand that melee is the only stat that matters. You are never gonna be using your Super with this build because it's just so weak compared to your hammer. So that is why you just want to focus hard on 200 melee, nothing else matters. Now, for the exotic armor of choice, of course, it is going to be Worm God Caress. This one is going to make it so if you get kills with your melee, you are going to increase your melee damage. And when you are at maximum stacks of the buff, it is going to increase your melee damage by 400% or 5 times. So stack that together with Roaring Flames, you have 600%, and then it just keeps going up and up and up, and your hammers do like an insane amount of damage. In fact, I'll show you. So I'm just going to stack up a few kills here of my Roaring Flames and Burning Fists, both at the same time, and I'm just going to show you how much damage it does versus this barrier champion here. 4,330. That's a lot of damage. So if you can imagine that versus every ad, you'll see it in the gameplay. And by the way, one thing I wanted to mention with the gameplay is that you may have seen it already. I have went out of my way to get footage from the opening encounter of the Equilibrium dungeon on Cutthroat Combat, which is -40, and there's a bunch of tanks that are shooting you all the time. There's also loads of yellow bar enemies, snipers. You're basically being pelted from all sides, and I wanted to show you that on Cutthroat because this build is so good in that endgame content. And it's also every other piece of footage that you see in this video is from either ultimate or, you know, higher deltas. So I just wanted to make a point that this build is very good in especially the hardest content. So yeah, we have Worm Gods to make our hammers do a ton of damage. This is very standard. And then for the weapons, we are going with the Praxic Blade. Now, the reason I've gone for the Praxic Blade is not really to use it, but it's mainly just for the Hyperblade Catalyst. And you might be seeing this in some of the gameplay where I occasionally just pull out the Praxic Blade and block with it just to trigger Amplified, because Hyperblade makes it so reflecting shots causes you to become amplified and grants this sword increased lunge distance for a single swing. I'm only using it to get amplified because when you are amplified, you get that 15% DR and enemies are less accurate when targeting you. So if you factor that in with the other DR you are getting from Ferropotent and Smoke Jumper, you are basically a tank that has infinite healing and insane damage output. So all combined together make for an excellent build. For your secondary weapon, the only ones that I've taken in the gameplay you're seeing are for dealing with champions. Again, you are just going to be using your hammer for absolutely everything. And another thing that I wanted to mention about the hammer is that this build is excellent for solo flawlessing the new Equilibrium dungeon if that is what you wanted to do, because it is great for survivability, as I've shown you, but it is also really good for damage. If you're a Titan thinking of going in and completing the challenge, this build allows you to two-phase both of the bosses if you pair it with a 1-2 punch shotgun and tractor cannon. In fact, as I'm talking about this, I will have gameplay of me doing a damage phase versus Harrow, just so you can see how much damage it deals versus him. He's actually a pretty healthy boss, so the fact that this build is able to double up as a damage/support role for your team, as well as being an absolute ad clear monster, is rather nice. Now, for the artifact, it doesn't really matter what you take here because there aren't that many solar focused artifact perks. In fact, there are none. We might get more in Shadow and Order, we don't know, in 74 days. I've gone for Elemental Siphon here so that kills, if I decide to get kills with my lightsaber, it'll make a fire sprite to get my hammer back if I somehow lose it. But the rest, just spec into lightsaber stuff. Go for combination Argent Blade, Sword Storm combo, go for kinetic synthesis, armor smith. So so that whenever you break ablative armor, you'll get a bit more DR, which is quite nice. And then after that, maybe counter energy. I wasn't using counter energy in any of the gameplay in the ones that had champions in, at least, so it's not really needed because, you know, you're only going to get a bit more energy for like your healing grenade, but I guess it is nice to have at the end of the day. Artifact doesn't really matter. The main focus is just on the armor sets, like I explained at the beginning of the video. Ferropotent is very easy to obtain. Smoke Jumper isn't, but if you can, I would definitely try and rip some Hawthorne engrams just to see if you get lucky and get some of this. However, Bungie did say that in the future they are working on a way for people to be able to earn these sets if they haven't already, so rest assured at some point you will be able to farm these, probably in Shadow and Order if I had to guess. Now, just finishing up with the mods for the helmet, I'm just taking a special ammo finder and a heavy ammo finder just for my weapons because you don't need things like hands-on. You could take it if you want to, but not necessary. Then I've gone for a kinetic siphon so that kills with my lightsaber make an orb. For the gloves, very important, have to run triple heavy-handed so that every single melee kill you get creates an orb and therefore triggers the Smoke Jumper set bonus. Chest piece is general resist mods like usual. For the boots, I have stacks on stacks, kinetic scavenger for my lightsaber, and then an innovation so that I get my healing grenade back faster. And then finally for the class item, I have powerful attraction, Reaper, and special finisher. Like I said, the only one that really matters is triple heavy-handed on your gloves. Now, as far as the optimal gameplay loop is concerned, for this build, the only thing that matters is getting that first kill. As soon as you have one kill with your hammer, you're going to have one stack of Worm Gods and also one stack of Roaring Flames, which is basically enough to one-shot whatever sort of low health unit is next in any level of content. So all you need is that first kill. You can use your weapons to maybe weaken the target beforehand, so it's a guaranteed one-shot with the hammer, but as soon as you have that first kill, you are essentially just off to the races. After that, just kill everything, collect the orbs, trigger your Ferropotent, trigger your Smoke Jumper. It's all just done in the background for you. You don't even have to worry about it, and you're just going to be mowing through everything because your hammer is dealing thousands of damage to whatever you come across. Seriously, this build is fantastic, and you even saw people using it in the contest Equilibrium last weekend, where people were using it just as a tractor support role. In fact, there were also duo clears. There were duo clears of people using this build of like duo Harrow, duo Seer on contest. So do not underestimate this build going into like contest level feats in the future. It is very much relevant, especially now with the new set bonuses that we have on offer. Before we end off, here is the fashion for the build. It's just the classic Stormtrooper if you want to copy that. And as always, the link to the build will be down in the description box below. So I hope you enjoyed today's video, guys, and I really encourage you to go and try this build because it has never been better for Solar Titans. But that is all I have for today. So thank you very much for coming and watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye for now, dear viewer.